brother, whether you're a mother, you're staying alive, staying alive. Feel the city breaking and everybody shaking.
Hey guys, this is Staying Alive, and I'm Louie J, and thanks for tuning into the podcast. And before we get started today, I wanted to make a special thanks to everybody that's tuned in and for all of your feedback and your encouragement, your support, and your kind words. It's been really cool so far. And of course, we just really got started. And so I'm grateful for everybody's input, and they're driving us to do some cool things. And of course, if you haven't tuned into the podcast yet, and this is your first one by chance, then thanks for being here. And just to kind of give you an understanding of what it is we're doing, it really is these unlikely conversations, or more importantly, these engaging conversations around creativity, leadership, entrepreneurship, and those random life experiences that just help shape us. And that's really, the likes of COVID, the likes of, relationships, things that end up happening to you along the way that maybe you didn't expect, and, have to make some shifts and some movements from. And, we wanted to come and talk about all of those things because I think that there's a chance for us to share some knowledge, take some journeys together, and see where we end up. So I'm thrilled to have you all. Thank you for joining me. And today, Frank and I are talking.
We're talking. Yeah, speaking of shifts, you were up at the cottage last week, but this week, how was your week this week?
Yeah, so, I really do treasure the time we have at the cottage because it is a chance for me to refuel and disconnect. And actually, I think more importantly, it's a chance for me to connect. And I was found, out in the woods there with limited access to technology. Actually, my technology broke. I ended up damaging the screen on my laptop, and that became a real, when you realize how valuable your tools are is when you don't have them and you can't function as quickly as you used to. And
that sucks. What'd you do, drop it out of the car or something?
No, actually, I had a couple of mirrors drop on me and realized at the same time that they did a nice number on the screen. So, yeah, that's in and around that $1,000 worth of repairs, and next thing you know, you're talking yourself into a new laptop because it's a critical tool in the mix. So that forced me to take a trip home, which I still love. I get to connect with people here. I get to visit the shops, which is a good chance for me to be able to connect with my team.
So were you here just for a couple of days, or?
Yeah, I spent the latter part of the weekend. We came into town and I've been here for most of the week now and working on some projects, which is actually really cool. It gives me a chance to get back into the home routine. And when you're at the cottage, you afford yourself a different type of schedule, and in most cases, it's got a little bit of leisure connected to it and, a little bit of downtime. But when you're back in the city, you feel like you're firing on all engines. And that's really where I think that I put my focus and time while I've been here this week. And it got me back into my early morning routine, which I love. I don't know if we've talked about that before, but it's that 20-20-20 rule.
Right.
Which is, if you were to Google 20-20-20 rule, you're going to find a whole bunch of definitions. The one that I'm looking at was coined by Robin Sharma, self-help expert. Not that I had much experience or understanding with what Robin Sharma does or wrote. I did find that I was already practicing this kind of mind shift in the morning, this mindset where I realized that we only have infinite amount of time to be able to do things in the day. And so I convinced myself that I had to get up earlier. And I was trying to belong to this, this fictitious club called the 5 a.m. club where you end up getting up maybe not at 5 a.m., but at least an hour earlier than your normal routine. So you could put an extra hour into your day. And when you turn that into a routine and you approach it where you're going to get some benefit from it, all of a sudden the routine really doesn't become a chore or a task or a labor. It becomes just part of your routine. And by exercising that 20-20-20 rule, it would be that the notion is that for the first 20 minutes that you wake, you, of course, go into something physical. So for me, it's walking the dogs, a brisk walk in the morning, especially when you're in the fall. You get that little bit of a chill, that nippy air that kind of gets into your nose, and it feels invigorating and alive. And so it's 20 minutes of activity. Get your heart rate up, and
do you have to run or just any kind of movement?
No, I think anything that gets you at least mobile. And I think if you're out to see improvement or evolution in that, then you would increase your rate, your capacity. You would increase your exercise or your movement. But the first 20 minutes is physical. The next 20 minutes is intended to be reflective so that you can consider some of the things that maybe you have in your plans. You might consider, if you're in business or an entrepreneur or a business owner, that you want to, see some goals in your mind for what the next quarter could look like. Maybe you want to tackle something that's in your mind about your relationship, but it's reflection. It really is a chance for you to look inwards. For me at that point, I start to look at the things that I'm very grateful for and I'm fortunate to have in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So I used to do it in my mind, but now I actually I vocalize it, I verbalize it, and I put out my gratitude by saying, I'm grateful for, of course, my wife, and then I talk about, in short order, I talk about the things that I'm so happy about, and having her in my life and me being part of her life. And then I talk about, my kids, and I'm grateful for them. And, I ended up always going through the family because, of course, we take for granted too often that the ones that are closest to us, we don't necessarily, always have them in the top of mind because there's so many things happening in our days. And
they're also always around.
They're always around. So you take for granted,
Yeah.
You don't go to the attraction in your city because it's there and you just take for granted. So for me, I like to spend some time being, happy about my family. And then I always end up finally landing on my dogs, who really have helped shape a lot of how I think and look and how I've set my mind. And they've given me a chance to be able to realize that they're actually here for me more than I am there for them. However, I'm their sole caregiver. My family definitely takes, their fair share of care, but it really lands on me. And so
minus the easy communication as well, right?
It's a different language.
Yeah.
Mind you, there is a language.
You guys are reading body language, I think.
Body language. And they respond and react like without any noise at all. It's amazing.
It was awesome. When we recorded our last podcast up at the cottage, you were saying, now watch this guy. He's going to do this.
Yes.
That one's going to come up here. They're going to jump. It was unbelievable how you predicted every move they made.
Well, and they give it to you, right? They're actors. I mean, they've got a performance and they're creatures of habit. And so all of a sudden, if you see the habit and the routine, and that actually was a great lesson for me too. The routine that those dogs go through on a day-to-day basis was a good foundation for me to know that, I got to get up. I got to get at it. I got to do my, 20-20-20. And that takes me to the last 20 minutes of what that 60-minute morning start looks like. And that is 20 minutes of learning. So we of course started with 20 minutes of movement, 20 minutes of reflection, and then 20 minutes of learning. This could be reading the newspaper. It could be listening to a podcast. It could be reading a paper that you're doing research on. It could be meditation. It could be something that helps you understand that there's something else for you to go gain out there knowledge-wise. And I'll tell you, by the end of that 60 minutes, you're firing on all cylinders. So for me, the routine goes into, having some breakfast, and then by that time you're making good decisions. You're not having, the peanut butter and jam toast and stuff in the morning. You actually are, okay, I've put so much effort into starting my day on the right path. Now I'm going to continue, and you end up altering, or at least I did anyway. I altered the food that I was putting in my body. I didn't necessarily start off with coffee anymore. I start off with a hot water and lemon. I feel like I'm my grandfather, but they do it for a reason. And that is a great way for you to start, the system now working because you've already challenged it mentally, you've satisfied it mentally, and you've had some physical movement. So and the whole idea there is that you spend an hour kind of preparing for your day. And the beautiful part is that it's only 7 o'clock in the morning now, or if you're in the 5 a.m. club, then it's only 6. So you have now a chance to maybe have the shower, get your day, going from that perspective, have a little breakfast. And by the time it is 7 o'clock, you're banging out emails and replies to all the chaos that you might have left yesterday and that you want to have a preamble on for today. You get it out. You get it working before most people have even decided they're getting out of bed.
I was going to ask you too, like not only is this just a mental shift in shaping that mind stronger, but obviously there's some spill off on the physicality too. I mean, you're moving, but do you find by waking up that early, doing this routine, that your physicality has changed as well? Are you finding that you have more energy?
More energy for sure. However, I am, I don't know if it's a victim or it's just a matter of understanding my body and my mind and how it works, but given any opportunity mid-afternoon to take a nap, it's got to be part of my plan. If I can find myself a place to curl up, to get away, it gives me that refuel. So I have so much energy. It's like I've got that fire going and the coal just keeps on burning. But at some point, you need to step back and refuel it again. It's not endless.
How long is that nap for?
20 minutes.
Really?
15, 20 minutes. I've mastered the art of power nap.
So my next question is, like, how late do you stay up then if you're getting up at, let's call it 5:30-ish?
Yeah, it really depends on what the task at hand is. I find myself sometimes getting in my best grooves, in that latter part of the day, and I just want to continue going. So that's going to be a late night. And then you afford yourself some freedom in the morning and say 5 a.m. just doesn't make sense because sleep is important, man.
Yeah.
I mean, more now than ever have I really adopted the philosophy that I need sleep because I'm not going to be at my best if I don't have it. And gone are the days when I used to pride myself on 4 hours and 3 hours. And actually, everybody thinks that I don't sleep because I just don't stop doing. I just carve out another extra hour in the morning if I can. I don't stop doing. But sleep's important, man. It really actually gets my brain and my body in the right place to be able to tackle the assault that I'm going to put on it during the day because it's exhausting. It's mentally exhausting at the end of my day. Here we are. We started this morning. I think we had our first meeting this morning at 7, and we're, here now 8:30 at night. And this day has not been an easy ride. So I need to refuel. I need to make sure that the energy levels are up. And if ever I feel like I've gone too far, then I have to step back and make sure that the mind and body are in check.
So when you were starting to do this 20-20-20 rule, what was it like out of the gate? Let's talk about your first week, because that's what I think a lot of people are interested in. Just hearing this, it sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
I want to give it a try, but I kind of want to know what I'm up against, because I know with my mind, I can talk myself out of any good idea.
Well, and here's the thing too. We as business owners, entrepreneurs, and people being responsible for our own time and our own selves, just in being a person, we can quite easily afford ourselves the freedom to say, not for me, not today. So if you're going to connect to this and you want to commit to it, I'll be brutally honest. It's gross. The first week is terrible, but it's like anything, right? I mean, you do 2 weeks. I think that's what the shift is. If you do 2 weeks of routinely changing something, then that becomes more of a habit.
Did it seem like it was too much all at once? Because I found over the years that if I'm going to start changing the way that I eat, I'd start with one thing, like, okay, more water. This week, more water. Then the following week, we're going to cut back on the type of breakfast that I'm going to have. Let's fix that.
Yes.
And it's a long progress for me, but for you, what was that like?
I mean, I'm the kind of all in all the time. There's no real let's dance around this. Let's just jump in. So for me, I have to I break habits. I ended up giving up meat. I think we're in our 4th year now, and it was overnight. It was after seeing another mind shift. It was after seeing a documentary that told me, hey, listen, I've been thinking like that for a long time. Maybe I should, wean myself off of meat. And what I meant by wean myself off was stop today.
Wow.
And I did. So I jumped into 20-20-20, no life preserver, no bathing suit even, just jump in. And that's how I am. So I think, you find your balance and you find how you would operate in that space. But I think what really made it easy for me, because although it was gross, it was hard because, I was always a late night owl and, felt that sleep in the morning was critical. And I'd find myself rushing for things and then making mistakes when I kind of gave it to the last minute, the last effort. It was always a compromise, but I found the reward in my behavior change. Like, for example, I say all the time when I post on social media, when I find this brilliant sunrise and you're able to take that in peace and quiet and during that moment of reflection, and when you're up there for a 5 a.m. or a 5:30 in the middle of summer and you get the payoff, you get this incredible reward. I call it the free roadside attraction. It's free.
Yeah.
So you walk to some place where you find it, and then all of a sudden your 5 a.m. just paid off. Like, you can't even begin to imagine how rewarding that is. And we've all seen incredible sunrises, amazing sunsets, and we relish and cherish those. And when we get a minute to do it in solitude, with focus, and by the way, there's only a short window or period of time when you can actually look at the sun directly without it doing eye damage.
Really?
And that's in that morning sunrise. It's magical. And you just see the same when it comes down for the sunset. And then when you're really lucky, you get to see that little green flash. Yeah. So,
That's
cool. Those are the rewards that I think I found immediately that made the rule and the adoption of that mindset really become less painful than I think I make it sound. There was a lot of payoffs, very, very strong, very fast, as a matter of fact. And then you're in a routine. And then, of course, when you can't, you afford yourself the freedom to say, today's not a 5 a.m. day.
Right.
But maybe I'm going to make it 6 a.m. instead, so that I can still give that extra hour to all of those things that are pulling at me and demand my time.
And you're still doing the routine. It's not like you've stopped, you just shifted it for that one day.
That's right. You still do the routine, and, you mark off on the calendar, if that's how you do things, about your successes, that, an X means that you've completed your day without any compromise. And when you don't have an X, then you leave it open because there was lots of openings there, which to me says the next day has to be an X.
Right.
So that's how I motivate myself in trying to take on the sheer volume of work that I manage. And that's kind of where today is too. I mean, I'm very excited because my teams are all fully engaged again. I mean, we're coming out of we're not coming out of pandemic. That's not the right way to approach this or consider it. We're in a version of the pandemic that seems to be somewhat more manageable, at least for our businesses. We're fortunate that we're not completely struck out again like we were for the longest time.
It feels like we're teetering on it.
Oh, that's exactly what it is. We're teetering. And in that, we made that early shift in changing the focus of the business and made very solid offerings to our marketing and advertising and event clients, and it's great to be back into planning strategy, and it's great to be back into identifying creative and themes and finding the current condition of the teams that are out there, the sales forces, the marketing teams, the corporate cultures that we help and serve. And so we've got a number of projects on the go again, which is great. We've also got the faith and trust of our clients that come to us for ideas, ideation, and how we're going to take their current condition and put it into a plan and a program to have them all collectively walk out with one single script. This is where we are today, and this is who we are, and this is what we are. And so I'm thrilled because my teams are all engaged again, and it's great just thinking. And I think a lot of that has to do with the mindset.
Right.
And so I've been spending a lot of time consuming content, like more than I ever have.
More than you should or ever have.
I don't know, probably both. But it has me filled with curiosity and wonder, and I feel very satisfied that once I get information that I know I can use to help either the client, the customer experience, my staff and my teams, then I'm like a kid in a candy store. It's like Christmas. I keep on unwrapping something really cool.
It almost feels like we have kind of stripped away. We were in a constant state. I think we were in a constant state of worry.
Yeah.
The uncertainty, what's happening, what's going on, I don't know, I'm not sure. And it seems like once we have had, let's call it the green light, moving forward to start executing our task in whatever work that we do, that slowly kind of took a back seat. And you're kind of focused at the task, and then occasionally you think about, how long is this going to last? And then you get deeper into it, and next thing you know, what was your team's mindset when they were starting to engage again?
I'll speak kind of generally about how we all came back to it. We kept in constant communication throughout all of the dark days, as it were, and that sense of worry and uncertainty and we engaged and connected often. So I had an understanding of where their minds were, and and shared with them a lot of their concerns and worry. And I quickly realized that I've got a couple of ways to approach it. Either I can let it consume me in a way that starts to take control, or I can take control. And that really kind of boils down to perspective and how you are setting your mind. And so I think that given that my perspective and my constant search for silver linings in everything that we do, ideally and hopefully was an inspiration to them to be able to adopt the same type of thinking. And so I think we all came back eager, maybe a little rusty, in the sense that, the days now are filled with something, so that obviously it wasn't a couple of weeks that we were off. We're talking about months. And, we had projects in the background, just cleaning house and making sure that administratively and process wise, we were tidying up some of the things we never had a chance to. We rebranded a whole division, or actually branded a whole division of a company that didn't exist before COVID. And then we started thinking about other projects and how we would treat them. So we always had something in the background, but not fully engaged like we are now. And I think they came back, fresh, refueled, and ready to be able to jump back in. And now it's evidenced by the way that we're performing. Like, the output is strong. The positivity is around us. The solution mind has taken over, where when you're just, at some point you're facing roadblocks and headaches and obstacles, you can easily find yourself kind of coming to a dead end. And now I find that people are coming into the situation with solutions before we even hit the roadblock. Like, what happens if? And in this constant kind of interest in consuming content right now, I've spent some time on the topic of mindset. Yeah. And I found a book, and of course I don't read books, so I'm listening to an audio book right now.
Just as good.
It's just as good, because it really does feed me, with information that helps move the needle. And I found a book by Carol Dweck. It was called The Successful Mindset, or Mindset, and I'll probably butcher this, and forgive me, Carol. But it's fascinating because it really debunks a mindset of an earlier generation that talked about praise and adoration and, identifying somebody's talents and recognizing them. I'm not suggesting that's a bad idea to recognize somebody's talent, but what it basically outlines, and she's a psychologist and a professor at Stanford, so she comes with more letters at the end of her name than I could ever imagine. And they've done studies and endless amounts of scientific research around how the brain works and how it operates. And she was looking to understand how we deal with that constant praise and living in that now moment of being great.
Is this like through childhood, or
most of her studies are around or around children?
Okay.
At least when they identify the examples in the book, and so what she wanted to do was try to figure out: are we destined to be as intelligent as we're born, or are we able to learn and increase our capacity and become better and better and better? And, Cole's notes, or the short form is that the incredible story is that we have the ability to grow our brains. We have the ability to improve. And she actually started to do research around what happens when children are praised for their natural talents, or what appears to be their natural talents. And she calls that the fixed mindset. And it's amazing because you think that when somebody's praised, and my generation, likely yours, and probably even my kids, we've brought them up with, if they start to show signs of a skill, then it's your proudest moment as a parent. And in fact, we've been making a number of mistakes along the way, not even realizing it. It's surprising what happens when a child is praised for their skill. They've done something right. They've passed a test. And it's like, oh my, you're so smart, congratulations. You really are talented. And when you start saying those and you're praising the action, or you're praising the now and how they got there, and what they are there, like, an accomplished A+ student because your test said it, then it was remarkable what happened when those children were challenged with more and they rejected the challenge.
Really?
And her example was this, that I think there were 10-year-olds where she had given them puzzles that were slightly more difficult than their skill set,
right.
And would be somewhat challenging to them, but not overly. There was a group of children in that test and over a number of tests that were very excited about the idea of this being a challenge, and went into it with, I'm really happy that this is going to be challenging. And then there was other children that, did the puzzle and got through it and, recognized that there was some pain points in there,
right.
but they were happy to have it accomplished, and they were rewarded and praised for accomplishing. And the other ones that found it more challenging were looking for that constant challenge. And what happened there was the ones that were praised were invited to do another puzzle or more puzzles, and they didn't want to do any more. They wanted to stop because they'd achieved their recognition.
Right.
They were praised for their talents, and they had accomplished a level where they were more often than not afraid to come back in and fail, because they would now ideally be identified as somebody that was less intelligent, because you are putting yourself at risk in doing the next puzzle and not winning and not performing. So they were afraid of the challenge. Whereas the other children that were encouraged by the difficulty and saw that their failure was actually a chance to learn and looked at it like, this is a learning process for me, asked what the name of the puzzles were so their mums and dads could buy them because they liked the challenge. And that type of mindset, she calls them two different things. One is a fixed mindset, which is really, I'm here, I'm going to be as smart as I ever was, and I'm going to be recognized for my brilliance or my ability because everybody tells me how smart I am, and I'm comfortable in this box. I'm not going to go outside of it because that's a risk that I won't be smart. On the other side, it's called a growth mindset, and that's the one that recognizes that likely they've been praised along the way for the process. Like they would be talked to in a way that said, you really came up with a number of ideas on how to get to your goal. Those ideas were really smart, or the notion that that their approach to the situation was a great learning, and the learning was praised and the process was praised. And it was evidenced by a Chicago school that she identifies that basically said, of course, if children have to pass so many classes to make it to the next grade, and this school didn't fail the students. They would mark on the report card, not yet.
Oh.
And it's the not yet mentality that had them recognize that I can and I'm going to.
Right.
As opposed to you're failing and you're done. So I love the evolution of thinking, and I love when people can bring new, identify new ways for us to be able to really, engage our children and create a better space for them mentally so that they can create a better space for their children, and it's just going to keep on evolving. And when I heard this, I was blown away because I found myself victim to being that mindset that was praising my children's, ability, their natural ability. My kids are artistic, they draw really well. And I remember, talking about how talented they were and how proud I am. And now I'm really realizing that I'm hopeful that I didn't set them up for failure. And you begin to see little pieces of evidence that say, maybe I should shift the way I'm talking so that they can think differently of the way they approach things. Because for me, I've shifted that mindset a while ago unconsciously, where when I find something challenging, I'm determined to overcome it. I want to win it. I gotta make it happen. And if it means that it's completely a new learning for me, then I'm going to try every possible approach to economize it. I'm not crazy. I don't want to overwork when I don't have to, but I'm going to engineer something on every version of my effort and my attempt to be better, to be faster. And I think that constant kind of strive for kind of like an efficiency with it makes me realize that I've got more to do and I want to keep on accomplishing it. I don't want to give up after I've accomplished it. I want to see what else is next. So I've adopted that, unconsciously. And when you start to realize that there's scientific data behind it and you're already part of that mindset, then I'm going to try to help people realize that too. And if you're a parent listening to this, I would highly recommend, if you're anybody listening to this, I'd highly recommend, downloading the book or getting the book. It's called Mindset. It's Carol Dweck. There's lots of studies and papers that support the thinking.
There's takeaways for yourself even at your age right now, right? Like I'm sure there's things of improvement, not just on how you parent, but your own personal gain.
Yeah, for certain. You end up putting yourself in check and you become aware of how you're operating and you start to course correct your language. You start to course correct the way you're thinking, and you want to make sure that you're putting out those positive reinforcements at the same time encouraging, my children and me to do more and just jump in. If I approach something, that goes back to perspective.
Yeah.
And I see this all the time. You see this, I don't want to say that you just see it in youth, but it's very clear in youth because they make their position very, very clear and aware. Everybody's aware of how they feel about things when they're not going to participate. But when you get back to your perspective and how you're approaching things, you've got a couple of options. It's either going to be, I don't like doing this and I have to, and I'm going to do it out of resent. And I always tell my kids, if you're pissed and you don't like the idea of doing that, let's talk about it, but don't do it with resent in your mind, because that whole time, that negative energy and your thought about this is just going to continue to kind of permeate, and it's going to roll around and you're going to be angry with it. And then you're going to be more angry the next time you do it. And then all of a sudden you realize that, you really probably could have overcame this in a shorter period of time with some efficiency in mind. When you really don't like doing it, you better figure a way to do it fast and well, so you don't have to do it again. And I find often that people that enter, a task or a chore with resent, they end up cutting corners and it's never done well. And they actually do have to go back and repeat or fix or, find a way to mend the problem, and I think it's
almost shaping their mindset already.
Right. And then all of a sudden they have a chance to, to continue that thinking. So once you start that habit again, you end up allowing that habit to be part of your life. And if you were to look at it differently, then you've got a chance for your mind to attack it in a way that could overcome it quickly. And now that becomes your habit. Like, yeah, let's bring it on, man. I'm doing stuff at the cottage this year, for example, that, is foreign to me. It's new. It's hard work. Like I'm doing stuff that, a lot of times people, if they're not skilled in that space, they'll hire somebody to come in and help them.
Right.
But I was like, man, I'm going to take it on. And I did. And it was challenging and it was, extremely fulfilling physically. But I also had some mental moments there too, where I'm like, I did this. It was entirely the way I approached it. I wasn't skilled. I didn't know. I learned, and I walked out very proud by the end result, the deliverable that I created. And, and the reason I started really thinking about all this mindset and perspective is because I think we could use a nice leg up or a refresher, especially now, given all that we've gone through in the last 6 months or more, where we've really challenged the way we look at things. And often, the outlook is pretty bleak for some people. And
it's still, if you watch the news, it just seems like the world is still in chaos in certain places anyway.
Yeah, I think
and to get away from that is a difficult thing for a lot of people.
They can't separate, the reality from that reality. Whereas I think that you can create this cocoon and bubble around yourself that insulates you from all of those forces that really could overpower people and does overpower people. I mean, I am most concerned about mental health and stability of those people that don't have this mindset and are really going to struggle with, what does this look like when it continues? And, we're creatures, we're social in our nature, most of us anyway, and those that actually like to spend time alone more often than not, they found that this wasn't such a massive shift for them.
Right.
But they're also part of the bigger picture, which meant that even people that were, extroverts versus the introverts, there still was a place for each one of them to play in this game. And when that all shifted, that really does have a massive effect on how people perceive things and how they're walking into their, return to work, the children's return to school, returning to, things that we took for granted that now we are finding that we're refacing on a very regular basis. There's fear, there's anxiety, there's so much that we haven't recognized because just on the notion of physical touch. I mean, we need to touch each other. We need to hug. We need to embrace. And not everybody's as fortunate as I am, where I've got a family and there's 5 of us. So we have an interaction no matter how locked down we get. And some people are by themselves.
Yeah, that's the hardest part.
That's the hardest part. I almost said when we went into first lockdown, it would be a good idea if we created a social app that says, I'm alone, could use some friendship. And, all of the singles and the people that were living by themselves and didn't have family in the neighborhood because they moved here for work or whatever their circumstances.
Or might even have a medical condition. So there's
correct.
Like, even though they're in quarantine, it's like now it's twice as tough.
Yeah, I've tried to, in my social media posts, put out the offer of support. If somebody does need it, then, I'll do whatever it takes to help, because I think right now we've got to really band together to look for the things that we don't recognize, especially when it comes to the mental health of our community, certainly our seniors and, anybody that's vulnerable and in a position where they could, be at risk to themselves or to their community. And I think we're going to see a lot of that. So I'd like to prepare mentally, and I want anybody that's listening, to take the opportunity to find out a little bit more about maybe what they can do or what support groups might be available in their communities, because I think people are going to need a lot more than we understand now, and they might not feel so comfortable reaching out.
How did you get interested in this book? Like, did somebody present it to you, or was it just curiosity when you were, taking in all this content? It just
Yes. Well, yeah, actually, it came from the client meetings, because what I do when I go into strategy to understand or to start to identify what a theme could be for a national meeting, so that we all, like I said, walk out with an authentic story about the company and where they are. We talk to the key opinion leaders, the stakeholders, the leadership groups in these corporate environments, and we find out where everybody is. What's the current temperature? What's the climate in the environment? What are people feeling? How are they okay with their yoga ball that they're sitting on in their kitchen? Did we send them anything to identify or help with wellness? And in those conversations, it was over the course of a week, where the idea of a mind shift became very clear. Like, everybody has made the mind shift. They couldn't identify where they were. And then I started talking about, this is really a mindset. And quite honestly, I think that we'll find that some of these themes we end up coming up with for these national sales meetings and these conferences are going to surround the notion of a mindset. So the conversation started happening around mind shift, perception. What does a mindset sound like? And in that 1 week, I spoke about it more times than I imagined. And it made me realize that there's got to be research to be able to support this thinking that I was presenting to my clients, in suggesting that we take on these themes and these notions that actually help the employee, because I think there's an obligation. Well, it's not an obligation, it's an opportunity. How's that? I think there's an opportunity for corporate culture to really invest heavily in its people, because we all know that the number one asset of any company is its people. And when they're performing and they're happy and they're engaged and they've got some type of commitment and connection to what we're all doing, it's just a very positive vibe. And so I think that it's one thing for a company to give, John the sweater with the logo on the back, because that's something that everybody's done for years. But let's get down to what's really important. Sure, a sweater would be well received if the logo is done tastefully.
Right.
If it's the size of a watermelon, it ain't gonna fly. But let's do something more meaningful for the teams. Let's really take on messaging that's going to help them. Let's take on messaging that will end up not only shaping or helping their professional outlook, but translate it into something they could take home, and then how they can approach their day at home. And if that meant they speak about the 20-20-20 rule, then that's an opportunity for somebody to make a shift and set the mindset. And when you talk about Carol's book, then, you really are recognizing that you can ingrain that thinking at a very young age, and we should. And we should get away from the stuff that actually ends up paralyzing kids, because that ends up creating, paralyzed adults that really never end up shaping the mind much differently than what they were little Johnny when he drew a nice picture or got an A+. And actually, there was a cool part that another scientist that I can't remember who it was, but he was talking about the idea around London, England's taxi drivers. And I'm sure many of you know the story about how difficult it really is to become a taxi driver in London, certainly pre-GPS, where these drivers were basically, they'd have to go to university for map reading, and their exams were like rigorous in the sense that it was, you would have to describe to an instructor, how it is you're going to get from this address to that address, not even known landmarks. I want to go to 125 Yorkshire Boulevard, and I'm starting at 2020 Piccadilly Circus.
Right.
And they would have to provide a specific type of route, most economical, the most scenic, the one that's going to take them by this icon on the way. And they'd have to have that etched in memory. And here's where the cool part was. This is one of the proof points that the brain can continue growing and your learning can be exponential, because they scanned the brains of a number of these London taxi drivers. And there was an area in the brain where it identified your learning capacity, or, the activity around learning. And that part of the brain in every one of them was larger than average on most people.
Wow.
And so there was another scientific proof point that said that the brain's operating differently. And when you exercise your brain and you're filled with training and passion and dedication, and you really want to realize that I can be better at this,
And
when you come in...
recalling files too.
Recalling files. When you come into this with the notion, and this is what we should all walk away with, that I am capable of learning anything. I might not be the best basketball player, but I have the capacity to learn basketball. And the scientific research behind that showed that brain development was exercising, and it was actually protecting the neurons, the kind of pathways for these messages that are happening in our brains. And I'm not a scientist and I know nothing about neurology, but I do know this, that they describe...
Don't ask me.
Don't ask me. They did describe it like this, and it makes sense, that basically those passageways in the brain, once they're exercised and they're fully charged and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, you constantly keep on feeding them, that they become protected. And the difference between, it was like a wire being protected by an insulated, cover, like,
right.
In electricity. So the difference between the protected wire in our brain and the non-protected was that the protected wire was shooting off messages 10,000 times faster.
Whoa.
Than, it was remarkable, the difference in performance. So when you recognize that I kind of keep on constantly moving and learning, that my brain's in that mindset to take on more and to protect the channels that are actually pushing out and taking in, then all that makes sense, and you realize, like, here, I think the other example that I heard was, Michael Jordan, undisputably one of the best basketball players in the history of basketball, wasn't a great basketball player.
Super competitive, though.
Super competitive. Yeah, and he was rejected in the early days and wasn't good enough. And by passion, dedication, commitment, and competitiveness, and his constant effort, like he would practice for 3 hours before he went to school. That constant drive to increase his capacity got him to learn and perfect and master the skill of basketball to the point where he was untouchable. And there's many other examples we know about, the likes of Walt Disney being kicked out of art school and being told he wasn't creative. I mean, he went back at it and just kept going and going and going. And that repetition and that frequency created that mastery. And that's a perfect example of how we should look at things, and we should set our minds. And more importantly, set the minds for the youth so that they can really kind of walk into the situation eyes wide open and willing and ready to learn because they know they can.
And also, to those two masters, Walt Disney and Michael Jordan, they also learned how to deal with rejection.
Right.
They didn't just tuck their tails between their legs and went home and said, "That's it, I'm done. I'm done with basketball. I'm done with art. That's it." It was more of, "I'll show you," attitude. And I think, one of the things that we're going to be faced with down the road, because of the way we're raising kids today, it doesn't go for everybody, but they're so protected that they don't know what failure is, and they don't know how to deal with losing, failing, and we need to introduce that again. And this way, they know how to deal with it emotionally and move on and get better.
Well, that's back to the idea where Carol Dweck in her book would identify Michael Jordan and Walt Disney and anybody that would have been known for those early failures where they ended up becoming masters. They have what she coined as the growth mindset. Mm-hmm. And it was either likely to, a credit to their parents or, somebody of influence that would have praised them for their learning ability and for their constant, evolution and improvement. And they didn't look at it like a failure, although it didn't accomplish their goal. They looked at it like a chance to get better.
Right.
So I got to get better. I just got to get better. And I think that's really where the magic is that if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a business owner, and, if you're somebody that faces challenges, you got to recognize that your challenge and your failure is actually an opportunity to do better. And it's nothing more than that. Like, a lot of self-help books will suggest that you fail fast and fail often. And, I like that people are praising the idea of failure. And like I certainly make mistakes all the time. And I look at those mistakes as an opportunity to get better and course correct and find a solution. And that's where, getting back to the idea that, really we're problem solvers and engineers. If we look at it like, that failure is going to really stifle us and hold us back, then we're missing the opportunity to overcome it. And that's where I think that's where there's real power. And when you look at, so what, let's move on, because that didn't work, but now I know what doesn't work.
Yeah, you have to recognize it though, for sure, right? You
have to stop and recognize, and ideally, without it being too painful, it was painful enough that you really are motivated to overcome it. I remember being in the military and climbing the mountain in Banff, Canada, and I was terrified. I was afraid of heights, and here I am on a rock climbing mission that was going to have me climb the faces of some, very significant mountains. And I was shaking like a leaf. And I remember the rock ape. We called them rock apes. They were military rock instructors, and they would teach us how to climb. I remember one climbing up beside me, and I'm all harnessed in. And, he comes up beside me with no harness, of course, because he can lift himself up with his fingernails. Mm. And I was shaking, and I couldn't stop shaking. And, I was probably, 10 stories up. It was enough to make anyone that really didn't like heights scared.
Sure.
And he said, "What are you afraid of?" And I said, "I'm afraid of falling." And he goes, "So fall." And it was an amazing lesson at a young age that made me recognize that I've got to trust that if I fall, I'm going to be okay. But everything in my mind tells me that if I fall, I'm going to die.
Right.
Except for this cord that's wrapped around me, and it's there for a reason. And so I said, I can't. He goes, you got to fall. And I said, I can't. And he said, take that handhold. And I went to grab, obviously he recognized it was too far for me to reach. I went to grab the handhold. I didn't hold on, and I fell. And I scraped my face against the rock. I had a little bit of, scab on my nose for a while. But then he climbed down to me and he goes, so how was it? And I said, it was okay. It was okay. And you get your composure and you realize that wasn't nearly as bad as I thought. I'm going to overcome this, and I'm going to keep on climbing. And as a result, it was probably one of the most meaningful summers of my time with the cadets. And I got a chance to really understand what it takes to fight your fear, and get over the fact that that's not going to cripple me. It's not going to paralyze me. And once you get that momentum going and that win, then you're really powerful. And everything below it is like, piece of cake, man. Let's take that on anytime.
And now you're talking yourself out of thinking that way too, right? Just that experience.
You have moments where you get to reflect on those, milestone times in your life. And that for me was one of the ones that comes up often. However, I never think about it. It's always there as being, don't you remember when? And that quickly tells me that, that was a big scare for me. I was really quite terrified of it. But I had the guidance and support of somebody, and they got me through it and made me recognize that I really can overcome the biggest fears that I have, because there was nothing bigger than that at the time. I mean, in my mind, it was like either you climb or die,
right.
And that was it. And that was a reality and a possibility, unlikely, but still, when you put that in your mind, it's the same thing that stops people from getting on the water slide, that stops people from getting on the roller coaster.
Or even starting a business. Like, there's so many people that think that they would love to do it or have a good idea, but stop themselves short from making any kind of commitment forward to make it happen.
Yeah, I think that fear of failure and that notion of perfection, I can't do it unless it's at this level, it really is truly a fear of failure. And to be powerful and love the life you live and move into something that really could motivate you, you've got to recognize that failure is a gift. And it's a hard thing to understand until you really get a chance to fail. And once you do take that failing as the gift that it is, then it becomes your superpower. No problem. Let's go on. I mean, I'm fearless when it comes to things that people would never, ever take on because of my mindset.
So what kind of advice would you give somebody that's listening to this now that doesn't necessarily take the time to self-reflect, is interested in what we're talking about right now? And what kind of advice would you give to make that first step, that shift to start recognizing a different mindset?
I think if you're going to make a shift in the way you think, you have to be painfully aware of what makes you happy. If you're doing things in your life that just don't equal happy and won't motivate you to take that leap, then you got to be brutally honest with yourself and start to recognize that what happens if you don't. So if I don't make any changes now, this is what I have, and it's going to be the same, and it's going to end up in the same results. And I wasn't too happy about those results yesterday. I'm likely not going to be happy tomorrow. So that's got to be the kick in the ass that makes you really realize that something's got to give here. And when you're ridiculously honest about who you are and what makes you happy, then that pursuit of happiness becomes a mission. And that's where you start to introduce ideas and notions and thoughts that people are lending to you, that are presented to you, that you hear about, and then you start to scratch surfaces, right? I've yet to start really meditating. I've had moments of quiet, I've had reflection, but I can't wait to take on meditation, because that's another thing that everybody says. Oh, wait till you start meditating, man. You're unbelievable. But wait till you see what happens then. And so I'm really looking forward to that, and finding the right place in my in my world. And to that point, even yoga. And I think this is going to be cool, because as I'm putting that out there, and I'm I'm announcing it to the world. I'm making a commitment to myself.
You got to do it now.
I'm going to be accountable. I want somebody to say, you know what, how's it going? And then maybe collectively we can all take this journey together. Maybe
Sure.
it's the health, happiness, the welfare, the good, the good sides of everything that we're doing will be brought to everybody at the same time. Let's see how it goes.
Let's see how it goes. So at the end of most of your podcasts, you always like to ask that question or get a question from our listeners about what app kind of helps you out along the way. What are you using today that kind of helps you through your day?
Oh man, I use technology to my advantage. And after seeing Social Dilemma, I've been very conscious about the things that I do have in my my technology tool chest. And in this case, I would say, just keeping in this theme of mindset and mind shift, there's an app called Happify. It's a free app. And actually, this would help that listener that really hasn't made that leap yet and is looking to find happiness and shift their mind and the way they perceive and look at things and what their perspective is. So I would recommend highly Happify. It's free. It has a number of little tasks and activities that can easily put you in the mindset of happiness. And I think that everybody could use a little more of that. So that would be my recommendation today.
Cool.